This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You are listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. I am so excited to welcome Dr. Abby Hasberry back to the show today. We are celebrating her brand new book, Adopting Privilege, a memoir of reinventing my adoptee narrative. Abby is a therapist, a scholar, an adoptee, and a birth mother. We get into all of it: coercion in adoption, parenting after placing a child for adoption, reunion from both sides. We even talk about sororities. Abby also addresses why so many adoptees go on to place a child for adoption themselves. Before we get started, I want to personally invite you to join our Patreon adoptee community today over on adopteeson.com/community, which helps support you and also the show to support more adoptees around the world. We wrap up with some recommended resources, including sharing how you can join us for a book club event with Dr. Abby Hasberry. And links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website, adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I am so pleased to welcome back to Adoptees On, Dr. Abby Hasberry. Hi, Abby.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we talked a couple of years ago. We did a whole healing series episode. We talked a lot about therapy and race, and I'm sure those things are still absolutely front of mind for you, of course. But would you share a little more of your personal story with us today?
Sure. My personal story. So I was adopted in 1971 in Baltimore, transracially adopted. The really interesting thing that I like to share often is that when I was adopted, my parents had planned on adopting another Black child, but in 1972, the National Association of Black Social Workers put out a position statement against transracial adoption. And so when they went back in 1973 to start the process again, they were denied based on that. And so we talk a lot about that National Association of Black Social Workers position statement, but I'm actually someone who was personally affected by that decision. And I ended up being the only person of color in my family. My parents had 3 biological kids. And so a lot of my story is around the experiences of transracial adoption, the experiences of racism in the United States, the experiences of racism in just identity development in other countries as well, because I've lived all over the place, many states, many countries. And so I've had to learn to heal and to adapt and to really understand people and myself. And so a lot of that comes into my story, but it also comes into kind of the healing in my practice as a therapist and a lot of what I do in identity development as well, and as a former educator. So lots and lots of things that have happened to me over my life as a personal person and as a career person that have all been really affected by my adoption. I think the biggest thing really is around my identity development, though, as a Black woman and just as an adoptee as well, and thinking about the traumas that happened to me over the years and also how I kind of pushed through them. And I've really become a student of understanding how my body and my brain transformed trauma, and it kind of transformed who I was. And so thinking about anxiety, thinking about like depression, thinking about some of those protective things that we do, we put on those protective layers, and really kind of becoming a student of why these things have happened and how I've developed these parts of me, but also how they've really served me. And so I can appreciate those things and not be like, really upset about, my trauma reactions, my responses, but say like, this thing really served me when I was younger. Now I need to be able to figure out a way to let it know that I'm okay and I'm in charge, and heal that and kind of move on. And so my story is a little bit about that as well.
Your story is super unique to me in many ways, one of which is all the different places you lived growing up. You referenced, like, I've lived in many countries, like, absolutely. Can you talk about, as a therapist now, like looking back on that, Well, how do you think that impacted you as an adopted person? Having so many different transitions and like trying to figure out where home is. What's that sort of meant to you?
Yeah, and as an introvert,
Oh no.
it really affected me just moving around from place to place and trying to figure out who I was. Where did I fit in? How do I navigate this space and these friendships and this school? There's a lot of just trying to figure out lots of parts of me. I think that one of the things that really kind of shaped who I was spending early years overseas, and not thinking about my race and even my adoption status, but really thinking of myself as an American and as an expat. It allowed me to develop young, as just a human and as a being, and then to think about the other parts of my identity, those intersections later in life. I think that that helped kind of shape who I am and how I look at the world, and really just I don't know, it shaped how I relate to other people and feeling relatable to other people as well, because I've been so many places and had to navigate so many different spaces.
I wondered about like identity development when it felt like to me you got trained to really try and know who you were because you were the same thing moving to place versus all your surroundings. I don't know. Do you think that's true? I don't like I lived basically the same place for, 17 years. I've lived in the same, let's say 4 block radius for 20 years. The idea of moving is actually
Wow.
quite scary for me to move to a different country or place or even a different town than I live in. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely believe that. And one of the things that I remember my mom saying when I got a little bit older, not so much in my elementary years, but middle school, when high school, and when we would move, and then even I told myself as I moved as an adult, is every time I moved, I got to reinvent myself and decide like what parts of me I wanted to keep and what parts of me I wanted to leave in that old life. And so it really was a lot of thought about who I am and how I'm showing up in spaces and who I want to be and how I want other people to see me. I thought about that a lot and had the opportunity to kind of mold that and be intentional, even as a child, because I'm moving to this whole new place where no one knows me. And how do I want to dress? How do I want to show up? I don't have to be who I was a year ago. They didn't know that person at all. So yeah, it absolutely. I trained is a really great way to kind of explain the process of learning to just shape my identity intentionally.
Hmm. Well, you know what? I love that for you because it sounded like a benefit in the end. It feels scary for me to think about what I would have done in those circumstances. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. It was definitely scary at times. One of the things I don't think I put in my book, I'm not sure if I did or not, but I remember in ninth grade moving to a new school and spending the very first lunch period crying in the phone booth talking to my mom because I didn't know anyone. So like it wasn't like this all sunshines and rainbows and roses with moving. There were definitely hard times
Indeed.
and really some hard effects on me.
It's kind of like how we talk about, the trauma in adoption. Oh, but adoptees are so resilient and right. It's like, let's look for any ray of sunshine in there, I guess.
Yes.
Um, so one of the pieces in your story is that you placed a child for adoption as a teenager. And I'm curious what your thoughts are as someone who holds 2 identities in the adoption constellation, because I know so many adoptees who have gone on to be first mothers, birth mothers, bio mothers, mothers of loss, natural mothers, whatever term you like to use. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. I was recently speaking to someone else who holds those both identities as you do. And she was like, I think being adopted is like a perfect pipeline to becoming a birth mother. Do you think that's the case?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I about a year ago I recorded a video where this term birth mother grooming in my head came, and it's like that's what I feel like I went through is really birth mother grooming. I was groomed to be a birth mother from being an adoptee from being a transracial adoptee. And so there's all this race stuff that kind of played into my mom's vision of who she thought I should be as a Black person. And when I was a teenage Black pregnant girl, it was like all of her stereotypes were crashing together, and the fear of that and what that would mean for me and for her, as well as all of the coercive practices that happen and all of those things. I absolutely see now that like I was really groomed to be a birth mother.
It's so upsetting. And yet, like when you talk about, it's like, yeah, we can see that
Yeah.
100%, right? That was a choice available to your parents to add to their family. Your parents, you talk about this a little bit in the book, how they were going to adopt from Vietnam, because that's like peak time, right? In the early 70s,
Yeah.
the Vietnam War, and we're talking about, all of these half American babies, we'll say. And so, God, what's that called? Operation Baby Lift, when they like that plane. Oh, that's terrible. Look up that history if you guys aren't familiar with it. But can you talk a little bit more about that? When from your mother experience, you shared like you'd like them placed in a Black family, and that didn't ultimately happen. And so part of that grooming, I think, goes into that.
Yeah, absolutely. That grooming of these are all these families that you can choose from. And it's like picking out a new house. You get to think about all the things that you would want in space, and, how much money do they have? What are their vacations like? It's like you get to develop this family, this dream family. And especially as an adoptee who already spent so much of my life in my head thinking about that dream family and that ghost kingdom life, it was just like, I'm now thinking about this ghost kingdom for my son. And so it was kind of like dreaming about everything that I would want for him. The thing I didn't understand, though, is that once I signed that paperwork, everything that we agreed upon, like it was a handshake agreement, there was nothing written. Everything we agreed upon, none of it was legal or binding. And so they did end up placing him with a completely different family, with a completely different dynamic. And specifically, the thing that was most hurtful is that they placed him transracially, and I wanted him to have at least one Black parent and at least one Black sibling, and he had none of that. And that was, and they knew from our conversations that that was the most important thing for me. And even though at 16 and 17, when these conversations were taking place, I was still definitely very much in the fog. I was very aware of those things that needed to happen and were important to me. But yeah, they did not honor that at all.
I'm so sorry. It's like I gave you everything and you couldn't even respect like
The one thing.
the one thing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've heard you talk about, and you talk about a little bit in the book, not a little bit, quite a bit in the book, is your idea that this is a temporary situation and you weren't given any other outs. Like people were like, oh, we'll help you, here you can, whatever you do, we'll support you. But like, there's the one option. Here's the one choice.
Yes.
Yeah. Because a lot of people don't actually understand all the coercion and manipulation that happens for mothers. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was something that I did not realize until I was like a fully formed adult. For all of my years, until probably, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, I really believed that I made this choice. I believe that everything was laid out in front of me, and I made a decision based on what I had at that moment. Still felt regret, felt shame and guilt about it, but really believed that I had made the choice. As a parent now, as an adult, and going back and looking and even getting back memories that I had blocked out afterward, I really understand that there was no choice there. There was no, this is how you'll go to college. This is how you're going to continue to run track. This is where the baby will go. This is where we'll have a crib in a month and a half. Because when I started these conversations, I had him a month and a half later. And so there was none of that just pathway that they gave me. My parents, when we talked about college, told me, this is what it will look like. This is where you'll get money. This is what financial aid is. This is where you'll live. This is how you'll go back and forth for holidays. If you want to go to the school that's a couple hours away, you can come back as often as you want. If you want to go to a school that's in another state, we don't have that much money for plane tickets, so this is how often you'll be able to come home. Whole plan. When we talked about having my son and raising him, it was, if you want to do it, we'll support you. That was the plan. There was no, I know we have a month and a half. This is how we're going to get clothes. What does breastfeeding look like? What are, nursing options, bottle feeding options? Where are we going to get a crib? What about childcare in September when you go back to school? I had him in June. None of those discussions were had. And so it was a choice with no information. And it really was coercion, because they would say, we will support you. But then they would tell me, these are all these families. These are all the things they have. These are the plans they have for your son. This is the lessons he'll be able to take, and the experiences and the vacations. And so I understood what his plan looked like if he were to go to someone else, but there was no plan if he were to stay with me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, it's still happening to this day. That's ultimately it's still happening to this day for mothers who are in a temporary situation and feel like they have no bridging help. I've spent the last month talking to a lot of mothers, and some of them are like, by the time 3 years later, I was fully resourced and in fact had more resources than my child's adoptive parents. It's just it's so temporary. How do we help women parent who really would like to parent?
Yeah.
It's just so angering.
Yeah, and the ironic thing for me is that the family that I chose, not the one that he went to, but the family that I chose, were a doctor and lawyer. My husband and I are doctor, PhD, but a doctor, and he's a lawyer. And we have all of the Black history, and he would have had Black siblings, and all the things that I wanted him. The plan I had laid out for him that he didn't get is now my home. And so it's maddening, heartbreaking, all of the things.
Yeah. I know you trained in IFS in the last year. I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah.
And so how has that helped you personally to look back at, say 16-year-old Abby within you and just be like, girl, you didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It has definitely helped to really give myself more grace, and understand why I did certain things and how these protective parts came. It's really helped me to see kind of the parts of me that were really hurt and how they're still in their hurt, and how when I get kind of triggered, I hate the word triggered, but when I get triggered by something, when those hurt parts of me get triggered by something, my reactive part of me that comes out and reacts, I can understand it and give it a little more grace. And also it really helps me to kind of bring it back down much more quickly, because I can recognize that this is a reaction as a protective part of the hurt part of me. And so my reaction isn't the anger or whatever the feeling is. It really is pain and hurt. And so I can really kind of go to that pain and hurt and not to the reaction. IFS has definitely helped me see that in me, but more importantly, it's helped me see that in my patients and my clients, and help them to kind of see that in themselves.
Can we sort of go back in time a little bit to when you had your second child? How was parenting after placing for you? Because for a lot of folks, right, it brings all the trauma right to the surface again, and that's really difficult.
Yeah, I think that part of my protective ability or disability, I don't know, it depends on how you look at it, is that I pushed the memories away. And so having my son did not bring up a whole lot of that. The thing that really kind of brought it up was when he was around 5 and started saying he wanted an older brother. And I was just like, what in the world? What kid asks for an older brother specifically when he has one out there? And what do I say to this? And so I think that was the first time that it really struck me to my core that this is a thing that's affecting not only me, but him. But because I pushed away all of the other memories, it did not play the part that I've often heard it does in other first parents.
Okay, wait, how? I want to ask this. I don't know. I'm going to ask it. How and when did you decide to tell your other children that they in fact did have an older brother?
I did not tell them until I found him, because I didn't want them to feel what I felt, which is that that longing, that, the questioning, the where is he okay? I didn't want them to have those same anxious feelings that I had my entire life. And so it wasn't until I was sure that I'd found him that I told them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that, looking back, are you that was a good choice to protect them?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because For my son, I think it was he kind of somehow knew, like when we did finally tell him, it wasn't, he didn't have a huge reaction. It was like, because I brought up, how you always ask for an older brother and like you do have one. And they're so incredibly similar down to their hobbies. And that I think that it was the right thing to do for them. And especially for my youngest, because she was 4 when we found him. And so she really hasn't known life without him. I think it's been hardest for her as my son has come in and out of our life and has had to deal with his own adoption trauma and deciding whether or not to have contact or not. But I think it's been hardest for her because she didn't know life without him. So when he leaves, it feels like a hole in a way that's different from my other 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you've experienced reunion in different ways.
Yeah, so many ways.
So many ways. So, okay, I have a question as someone who was, sorry, listeners, I'm going to repeat a story I've told 20 times on the show. I presented with a friend. We're both adoptees, both rejected from our mothers in reunion after a period of time of knowing them. And so during this presentation, we were attacked by a birth mom in the room. She was very angry, very upset with the things we were sharing, insinuating that, me and my co-presenter were somehow just like resharing things that just super weren't helpful and all those things. And like, we only saw the adoptee side. Fair enough. That's my experience. So
Absolutely.
As someone who's experienced a reunion from both sides, and there you go, we have an adoptee that comes in and out and what feels safe to them and those things. What do you see what are some things that are really helpful in reunion? What are some things that are not helpful? I mean, I know it's different for everybody. Like, do you see things adoptees that are doing, like, I'm going to put in quotations, like wrong in reunion? Because I felt very slimed for the things that I was saying.
I think it's a personal experience. And so as long as you're kind of living in what your own truth is, I don't, and you're really giving grace and understanding to everyone else in that situation, I don't think that there's a right or wrong. It's what our capacity is and how we are able to handle it. My birth mother has not been able to, has rejected me. And I just see it as her still living in her pain and her trauma. And it's not a reflection of me. I try to not make it a reflection of her, although there are days when it hurts. And so I'm not happy with her. But overall, I just try to see and recognize that she's still living in all the pain of it as well. And so she may never be able to open up to me. As far as my son kind of going in and out and saying at times he can't handle the contact, he doesn't want anything to do with us and specifically with me, I treat it as just any parent, like I am his parent. And so it's my job to kind of be the eye of the hurricane, and whatever he's doing around me is whatever he needs to do at that moment. My job is to stay steady and be here. If he wants to be here, then great. If he doesn't, then that's fine as well. You have to center yourself in it and see what you need. I know that I have the capacity to be that for him. I don't know what my capacity would ever be for my birth mother if she reached out again. I don't know if I'd want to have contact with her or not. I just play it by ear and see what happens when it happens, if it ever happens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So as someone who searched a long time ago, and then you did DNA testing and stuff, did you feel some sort of way about searching for your son and what that would look like?
Yeah, I definitely hoped he would have done it. Like when he turned 18, it was waiting for a while. Like for a couple months after he turned 18, I was checking the mail and hoping every time the phone rang that this would be the time. He didn't. And I learned later that boys often don't search in the same way that girls do. They aren't as interested. And so then when he turned 21, I decided to start looking again because I thought at that point brain development was happening more. College was probably near ending and all of the things, his life would be a little more stable and settled. And so that's when I decided to go out on my own and start looking for him. I really wanted to think about when he would feel supported and mature enough and be stable enough in order for me to kind of come in and disrupt his world a little bit and say, here I am.
And then what did you say to your youngest daughter when he was taking breaks?
Just that he just needed like to step away, and it was a lot for him to handle, and that we would, as a family, support that and be here when and if he wanted to come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I know people must have similar situations happening in their households, and
Yeah.
it's so confusing to navigate. Like, what's the right thing to do? You know? Are you comfortable talking about your adoptive mom a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
You share in your new book that she passed in 2023 after a battle with dementia, and your relationship with her also sort of went up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how did you navigate those years with her with dementia, and then following her passing? Like, how did you take care of yourself in the grieving process?
Yeah, dementia's horrible. It is a long, long grieving process because it starts off with just kind of memory things and just like repeating of stories in a conversation, and then just deteriorates over the years. And the way that I kind of, I guess, put up my boundaries in order to be okay and really honor the capacity that I had to deal with it was to only deal with it with her specifically when I knew I was strong. There were times when I knew I couldn't, it was just too hard. And towards the end, I did not see her very often. And I know that part of that was me wanting to preserve her memory as the person that she was, the strong kind of force, very opinionated, very, very in your face person that she was. I wanted to remember her as that and not the shell that she kind of turned into, a different person, relapsed almost into her own childhood. And that was not only my intention, but also because she had had a relative who had dementia, who lived with her at some point in childhood. And she had spoken about how if that ever happened to her, that's not how she wanted her to be remembered. She talked about us like, don't have me come live in your house, like put me somewhere else. I don't want you guys to have to deal with what I did. And she also, I refer to my mom as an education snob. She loved everything to do with education. And that was one of the things she was most proud about herself, is how intelligent she was as well. And so thinking about her losing her memories and losing that intelligence, I wanted to honor who she wanted to be and who she was and how she wanted to be remembered as well. So I did put up a lot of boundaries towards the end, which felt like losing her over and over again.
Mm-hmm. In your book, you seem to be so like, I always call it tender with the balance of how you talk about your parents. You give them a lot of grace. You share a lot of very difficult things. And you really, it seems to me like you're really trying to balance them out as like a full human while saying the things that happened. And were you like nervous about writing any of those things? Like, you share some really deeply personal things altogether in your memoir.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will be surprised by how candid you get. And how did you know what to share? And like, do you still feel like the adoptee loyalty to like sort of, I don't know, I'll say hedge, like it's not, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I kind of decided that anything that I'm healed from, and I'm writing from a healing place, I guess is more of what I want to say, is anything that I'm writing from in a healed place, I would write about. And then anything that was my story, that was just me, that I experienced, I'm allowed to write about it. I don't want to write about other people's stories or interpret things, but anything that was my story, I was going to write about. I also believed, I heard the quote, I feel like it was Dolly Parton, but I could be making this up, that if they wanted me to write better about them, they should have treated me better. And so that was kind of the honesty from which I wrote, is that like these things happened. And if you didn't want me to talk about it, don't do it. But at the same time, that balance that you talk about, I was very intentional about that because I like me. I think I turned out pretty well, and I have to give them credit for the parts of that they did. And so while there are things that they did absolutely wrong, there are things that they did absolutely right. And I wanted to highlight both parts of that and show that humans are flawed and can do horrible things, but they can also be amazing people that do awesome things. And so that balance was important to me, to not just point fingers at the horrible things that happen, but also to say, like, I am who I am because of the great things, the experiences, the travel, the ability to really understand my identity, the ability to be a critical thinker and think about race and the way that that shows up in the world. All of that is because of my parents. And so I wanted to give them that grace and give them that balance while also saying there are some really horrible things that happen in adoption.
You talked about your mom as an educator, and that's how you spent a lot of your career. You identify as a lifelong learner. How many PhDs do you have now? What's your certificate collection at for all your extra trainings? So those are such special things about you that, I mean, I haven't collected a bunch of like degrees, but I also identify as like a lifelong learner. Like I'm
Yeah.
just desperate to know more. And so I'm curious, what parts of those do you think are, can you parse out nature versus nurture, or like core Abby? Like I desire more knowledge. And it seems to me that you live your life in such a way that you desire to give back in a huge way.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I said before, my mom was an education snob. And so I think it was kind of really pressed into my brain that education is the way to grow, to expand your knowledge, to expand your experience, your abilities, all of that. So I think that pursuing it in that way was definitely part of my mom, part of my dad, because he also had a PhD. And so I wouldn't have even really known about a PhD in high school and thinking about going that path if I didn't have a father who had a PhD. And so I always that was had been one of my goals my entire life. However, the way that I've kind of weaved together my education, my experiences, and my like work life and all of those things are definitely inherently me. And I can say that because when I started to really develop my career and who I was before my mom passed, she couldn't understand what I did. Or like when I would talk to her about my job, she was just like, I don't understand what you do. And this was before dementia. She was just like I don't understand how you weave all these things together to make this path and what you're doing with your life. And so I know that that was the way that I've used my experiences and my education and all of it together to make this strange career that I'm in now was definitely me to the core.
That's sorry, I'm confused. Like she didn't know what you did. Okay.
She's like, why is that a job? I remember her asking me, like, why are people paying you to do these things? I don't know.
Okay, this is like must be post principal because she knew what that was,
Yeah,
right?
she did know it that one, but even that one, she was like, why would anyone want to do that job as a teacher? She asked me that.
Really?
Why would you want to be a principal? Yeah, she did ask me that at one point.
Oh, that's so interesting because you're just like a very effective leader and you model that really well in all the things that I've observed you doing. I wonder why she couldn't see herself ever doing something like that.
Yeah, she was a teacher to her heart. And my dad as well. He was a PhD, but he wanted to teach only. So he never did any research or published. And so that whole tenure thing never happened for him because they were both my parents were just teachers and not just, but were teachers to their core and did not want to do any of the other parts of education. They really believed in just in educating. So the other jobs, she was just like, why would you ever want to do any of that?
Curious. Okay, something else I'm curious, and I don't know if it's just because I'm Canadian. I don't know. When you talked about being in a sorority, I was like, okay, I know this is a big thing in the States. Maybe it is here. I just did not experience it personally. Okay, what is it like being in a sorority? And like, how has that shaped you?
Yeah, so I'm in a Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority incorporated, and it is a historically Black sorority. It was founded in 1908, and so it's very different. The Black fraternities and sororities are very different in that they are so incredibly community based, so incredibly part of your identity. It's not something you do in college and then you're done with it. It's not. It is kind of who you are and how you live. And so being able to be a part of a Black sorority as a transracial adoptee, it was almost a sign of like I made it. Like I found my identity. I've been accepted in a way that I don't know that I could have gotten in any other place because I'm part of legacies of history of sorority and sisterhood and all of the things that have to do with being in a Black sorority. And it really is part of your identity.
Okay. And to this day, you say the name of sorority. Are there still like things you're involved with?
Yeah. So with sororities, you get to do graduate chapter after you graduate from college. And so it is a lifelong commitment. There are lifelong service. It is a service organization. So there are things that you can do lifelong. This Saturday, actually, there's a chapter here in Baltimore, and we will be going for a walk together in the mall. There are service opportunities where you can do things in the community, and it is a week to week, monthly meeting, but week to week activities of service around the community.
And I imagine you would mentor younger women that are part of it then too, in some capacity, whether formal or informal.
Yeah, there could be formal and informal and even formal ways of mentoring in high school, going back to high school and mentoring as a grown person. So yes.
Okay. I'm so I'm so new to, I mean, listen, things I knew about sororities, movies, there's parties. Sometimes girls dress the same. So anyway,
Yeah.
It's really cool to learn about the other community involvement. And so it sounds like that also shaped a part of like a passions to give back and those kinds of things.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So you don't look like a grandma, but you are one. And so
Thank you.
for real. I'm like, you look so young. Can you you talked about legacy with sorority, but how about starting a new legacy for your biological family? And now that you have grandchildren, like what does it feel like to be a grandparent to a biologically related, like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I'm grandparent to biologically related children and some who are not. And so I have two
Okay.
granddaughters who are not biologically related, but my son is their dad and has been their dad, one since she was a little less than a year old, and the other since she was about 4. So yeah, it's interesting to have a family dynamic where the biology of it all hasn't made a difference in who is father and who is grandparent. And so, yes, I have 3 that I'm biologically related to and 2 that I'm not right now.
Okay.
And grandparenting is the most amazing experience ever. It's just like a different kind of love, and that kind of love that I only have to do for 45 minutes at a time if I want to, and I can give them that, which has been a really amazing thing too, especially as you get older and exhausted. But no, it's been my joy, and like I can't. Yeah, I would recommend.
Okay. Highly recommend being a grandparent.
Highly, highly. Yes.
Okay. I just wonder if you ever spend time reflecting on that. Like, my generations are going to be together now.
Yes. Yeah, especially with with the reunion, and my oldest daughter has gotten to know her cousins, her biological cousins. That has been really interesting. She's been the one who's really connected with them the most, probably because she's here, and also they're closest to her age. But yeah, it's very interesting and kind of a gift for them to be able to see people who look like them. And I didn't get that until I had my son. That was the first time. They have each other, they have me, and now they have this whole other side of the family that they get to see. And not only get to see, but get to see things about them. My son can play any instrument by ear, completely like musically inclined, and to find out that my biological family were all musicians. Most of them sing. Some actually a couple uncles who were pretty famous musicians. And so it was like those kinds of things just clicked. Like, okay, I see where we come from and why we have these things. And they get to experience it at early age, which I didn't get to do until I was an adult.
That's such a neat part of reunion. I agree. Like the extended sort of family building. And another thing we've talked about a little bit more recently on the show, but just the fact that even if you're denied a reunion with a biological parent, whether it's because you found them deceased or they've refused a connection with you, there's possibly other family members that you can build connections to, or your children can build connections to
Yes.
fill in some of those stories that as an adopted person, we may feel that we're missing.
Yes, absolutely. And I've experienced that as my mom rejected me and my biological dad died decades before I actually found the family. And so not being able to have connection with either one of them, but being able to connect to the children, my siblings, to my nieces and nephews, grandnieces and nephews, all of that has filled in a lot of what I missed.
Mm-hmm.
But I always say, though, you can never go back again. And so I recently spent some time with my siblings at a sibling reunion, and it was amazing. And the connection was just like right there. But then there were conversations about lived experiences that I just could not connect to, just did not have that experience with them, and felt like an outsider. Like I'm in this place where they accept me as their sibling, but they're having remember these conversations. At one point, they were singing a song that they sang together growing up, and none of that was part of my experience. And so while reunion brings back a lot of it, it also reminds you of often of how much you've lost.
Right. So relate to that so much. Even like being in the house and it's like, oh yeah, all the childhood family pictures. Yeah, I'm definitely not in there. I am not in there. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing. My last question for you before we do recommended resources. So your book is called Adopting Privilege.
Yes.
When did you discover who holds the privileges, who holds the advantages, the rights in adoption?
In adoption specifically, I would definitely say in relinquishment as a birth mother in that relinquishment time. Just definitely that was an experience of coercion and of just understanding that the agency worker and the hopeful adoptive parents, their needs were definitely much more prioritized than mine, even in the delivery room and giving birth. And then in my experience, being taken off the delivery floor and being put on just a regular surgical floor to disconnect me from the birth experience. Yeah, definitely in that relinquishment. I think that I recognized privilege very, very young as a transracial adoptee. I recognized economic privilege and racial privilege very, very young. But the adopting privilege of it, I really recognize as a birth parent.
Thank you. Your new book, Adopting Privilege, a memoir of reinventing my adoptee narrative. I don't say this to everybody, Abby. I read it immediately when you sent it to me. I read it in the same day, the same evening. I sat there and I was like, go away, I'm reading. I read on my laptop. It was so good. You put so much of you into it. I literally cried. I felt so proud of your bravery in the things that you share. I said earlier that you were more candid than I expected. And I think that's because going in, I thought I was going to meet a little bit more therapist, Dr. Hasberry and that's absolutely there, your expertise. And you have these like amazing, listen, Dear Abby letters. Come on. You're the Abby I'd like to write to. The reflections, like all of those things are there. But to get to know you in such a personal way, I felt kind of lucky, frankly, when I was reading it. And I just was like, this book is going to be so helpful. And as someone who's a leader in the community and shows that spirit of like generosity, of sharing wisdom and your story, like to like give all of it is just felt really special. So thank you for writing it. And I know people are just going to love reading it and getting to know you at a more deeper level.
Thank you.
Frankly, how is it to write some of these? Like, were you like, I don't know if I'm going to share this all?
Yeah, I definitely had a moment of that when I started writing. And my mentor for my PhD program, Dr. Clark, who is like the most amazing woman ever, she said, just write it all and you can take out whatever you want later. And so that was what I did. And I took out nothing. but she just like gave me the freedom to just pour it all out by saying that, and like saying if you have pause in the end, you can take it all out. You don't have to share all of it, but write it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it was hard. It was very many years. And there were even times when I would write it and come back like a year later, and I don't feel that way anymore. I've got to rewrite this section because a new memory came up, or just I've learned some more, or just like I've done some more healing and work, and I recognize that thing that I believed wasn't really true, and it's not true to who I am right now, at least. And so it was a very much a labor of love and a labor of healing, and an intense process. Don't regret any of it, though.
Okay, good. And you write like the scathing critiques of the adoption system.
Yeah.
That, and like you really go there. So for anyone who's like, oh, I don't like, is she going to be hesitant about that? Like, no, you just say all the real things, like really. So I loved it.
From my story,
yes,
from my story.
From your story. Who are you hoping to read it besides us?
Definitely adoptees. Yeah,
okay.
Definitely adoptees
yeah.
and birth parents, but therapists, educators, parents in general, just people, because people who have been victims of sexual abuse, people who have been victims of microaggressions, like literally everybody, I think anyone can get something from the story, because again, I really didn't hold back very much. So yeah, I really feel like I want everyone to read it, but I definitely think educators, therapists, people who are in the community, social workers, adoption agency people, just to get another narrative added to the story.
Absolutely. I agree. I think this will be a great book that we'll be able to recommend to our friends who don't even have a connection to adoption, because it's so, I love that it's really story driven, and so it's so easily readable, but you're saying all the things that we need to hear. So
thank you.
Yeah. Well done. You. What do you want to recommend to us?
One of the things, Rebecca Wellington's Who is a Worthy Mother? Absolutely. It's one of the books that I've recommended to some of my clients, and Relinquished as well. Both of those books I recommend to my clients. And the other thing that I've been kind of reading and thinking about for healing is The Seven Circles, which is based on Indigenous healing spaces, but thinking about the 7 circles of wellness and the ways that we show up in those places, our safe space, our food, our movement, religion, all of those 7 circles of just how we really find balance and find ourselves in the world.
Amazing. We will put links to all of those books in the show notes. Thank you so much, Abby. It's just such an honor to get to talk with you again. Where can we find your book and follow along with you and connect with you online?
Easiest is just adoptingprivilege.com. And then all of my links are there. I'm on Instagram as well, but you can get to all of that from adoptingprivilege.com.
Perfect. We will also link to your socials in the show notes. Congratulations on your book launch. So excited to cheer you on.
Thank you.
I am so excited that we get to read Abby's book with her in April. I hope you will join us. We are going to have info in the show notes for you. And if you're wondering about any of our upcoming live events, like maybe you're listening to this in 2028 and you're like, I know this book club is well past. You can go to adopteeson.com/calendar and see any of our upcoming live events. We usually host them on Zoom, and Abby will be joining us. We'll talk all about her memoir, full spoilers, which we tried to avoid during this interview. And I hope you will come. There is a 7-day free trial. Patreon now has activated gift subscriptions. So if you want to join and you want to bring your bestie adoptee friend along, you can gift Patreon subscriptions now, which is really amazing. We've asked Patreon to do that for years and years and years. And so now they finally have implemented that. And if you want a scholarship, there's also a link on the website, adopteeson.com, that you can click through and apply. And yeah, that's I'm really looking forward to that. We also have our monthly Ask an Adoptee Therapist events, which are some of my favorite things that we do. And you're welcome to submit questions for our therapists at adopteeson.com/ask. Thank you so much for listening. Let's talk again soon.